Hello, I'm Brownfield Ag News anchor and reporter Ken Anderson, and we're visiting once again today via Google Hangout with Frank Chen, journalist with the Asia Times media outlet. Frank is based in Hong Kong and is a native of China. Hello again, Frank.
Hello, Ken. Nice to meet you again.
Yeah, good to see you again. Frank, last time we visited was back in February. There have been several more rounds of talks between U.S. and Chinese negotiators. And from all reports, the two sides continue to make some good progress towards a trade agreement. So I'd like to get your perspective, the latest on what you're hearing from that side of the world.
Well, it's obvious that both Beijing and Washington have been trying to put a positive spin on the ongoing trade talks, but it cannot gloss over the fact that the negotiation has turned out to be a quite protracted one. I think no one could have envisaged from the very beginning that it would take such a long time before a deal can be made. I think even the US side underestimated the complexity of the issues. But despite all the difficulties, both sides have been stressing that progress is being made. I think in a bid to not try not to spook the market too much, not to spook investors too much. I think this is the third time that we have discussed trade war and trade talks in our interview. Last time we were quite optimistic that a deal could be on the horizon to put an end to the trade war that Trump may soon be toasting with Xi Jinping to rekindle the amicable economic ties. But that's not the case. So I think that at this stage, no one really knows when a deal can be made. Even Trump doesn't know that. It really depends on the whether the both sides can agree upon the enforcement mechanism, the follow-up mechanism. That's the crux of the issue here. But still, there are some fun factoids that I heard from my side about the trade talks. One is that the US is pretty much concerned about the Chinese translation of the upcoming agreement, the text and all the clauses of the agreement, because Beijing insists that the Chinese version, the Chinese translation, should have the same legally binding effect as the original one in English. And Beijing will only stick to the terms and conditions specified in the Chinese translation, in the Chinese version. So I heard that the US has been putting all these stops to make sure that nothing is watered down, nothing is lost in translation. And given all the ambiguities, given the subtle differences, the connotations of the Chinese language. So I think when a formal deal is made, when a agreement is announced, both in English and Chinese, I think this can be a good case study for language scholars. And the second fact is about a picture. Let me show you the picture. Hopefully you can see that. This is, I'm not sure you.
Yes, probably. I can see it. I can see that.
And Trump and the guy on the left is Liu He. He's the deputy premier heading the Chinese delegation to Washington earlier this week. And the picture shows that Liu was arranged to sit behind Trump in the White House in a position that is usually reserved for a clerk or an interpreter. So some Chinese netizens, they are not happy about this sort of arrangement, seating arrangement. They think that perhaps the Chinese delegation could have been given a cold shoulder, that or some even speculated that probably Liu He, the deputy premier, could be buckled down under an overbearing Trump. Trump Liu He is one of Xi Jinping's top economic advisors, one of Xi's most trusted lieutenants. And it is said that at the very beginning, when Trump started slapping tariffs on Chinese exports, Liu and other advisors, they suggested that perhaps we should agree to some of the legitimate, reasonable demands from the US. But it was he himself, a strong man who literally made himself the new emperor of China, president for life. It is him that vetoed all these suggestions. He chose to stick to the hardline approach. So had she agreed to at least some of the reasonable concerns from Washington, like intellectual property protection, fair market access, I think the entire world economy could have avoided such a beating.
Boy, I appreciate that perspective on the talks. We keep hearing the terms intellectual property rights and forced technology transfer as the really major issues in these talks, Frank. And I know you do a lot of reporting on technology and Chinese technology. So if you would, talk about the technology battles between the US and China and help us understand why this is the big issue in these negotiations.
So I think that the trade war has somehow descended into another Cold War on the technology front. So it's not entirely about trade deficit. It's not entirely about fair market access or China's promise to buy more goods from the US. I think the tech rivalry between the two countries is somehow inevitable, given that China has really doubled down on its investment, on its government subsidies to boost its research and development. And so in this ongoing, we can say tech war, that the Chinese company Huawei has been singled out. There has been a lot of claims that Huawei is a national security threat because it has single-handedly, I don't know why, but it seems to me that overnight Huawei has grabbed a stranglehold on the global 5G gear supply. So no wonder it has been singled out. But there is a very interesting perspective raised by a former Singaporean foreign minister during an interview with a Hong Kong-based newspaper. He said that Washington is concerned that after its companies have been eased out from the competition, from the race to 5G, then the US may lose its ability to tap to efforts drop on overseas users, on people, telecom subscribers overseas, because Huawei's dominance has enabled Beijing to do that. Some people may say that this can be a conspiracy theory, but I think it still makes sense, especially to those smaller countries. They are caught between China and the US. US has been mandating its allies in the Europe to ditch Huawei to join the containment. But Germany, France, and Spain, they have a second thought. So these smaller countries, they are caught between the two joints. And these countries may not have the capacity, may not have the technology to avoid to become a pawn, and they may not have the resources to protect themselves. So the tech war is really about the market dominance, technology dominance. So Huawei has, even it is being locked out of from the US market, it still has gained solid traction in emerging markets in Eastern Europe, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, not alone in China. So I think Huawei's dominance, Huawei's overseas in these countries may still enable Beijing the so-called backdoor to tap on these people overseas. But China has been making genuine efforts, and the company itself has been making genuine efforts to challenge the U.S. government. It has sued the U.S. government for the ban.
And so, as far as being part of these negotiations, I mean, is Huawei one of the items that are being discussed?
Yeah, exactly. Huawei has been somehow become a scapegoat, as it claims that it's not a state-owned enterprise in China. It's not owned by Beijing. It's owned by its employers. So it's a private company on the surface. But the allegations that the founder of Huawei, Ren Zhengfei, was a general within the People's Liberation Army before he founded the company. And during its early years, the company has been spoon-fed with fat orders from the PLA, as well as some transfers of technology from the military. So I still think there's some legitimate concerns about using Huawei's gear, but somehow I think that since Germany, since the UK, since France, and even since Italy, these countries, they are hesitate about a blanket ban against the Huawei, then I think that there are rooms for discussion, there are rooms for deliberation, and there are rooms for research in this country whether Chinese equipment can contain some backdoor for Beijing to exploit, or whether this kind of a threat may have been exaggerated. You know, all sorts of operating systems, all sorts of hardware may inherently contain some loopholes. That's why we keep receiving these updates from time to time if you use Apple or if you use Android. So let alone this hardware gear. So that's why probably somehow Washington has been making a kind of fuss about the threat, but no one really knows. It's really about whether you use this equipment or not, whether you want to stay connected, stay online or not. They have no choice.
Frank, I've enjoyed visiting with you again and appreciate your time. Good to see you again.
Thank you. My pleasure.